Okay, so we're 2 minutes past the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. I think people will still be shuffling in during this. But welcome, good morning. My name is Kevin Shanley. I lead go-to-market for Amazon Cognito, and I'm generally an identity go-to-market specialist within Amazon AWS. And today, we're going to be going through and talking about identity services. Now, we're actually going to primarily focus in on a couple of different services, our Workforce Identity and Access Manager, Identity Center, and also our Consumer Identity and Access Management suite, which is Cognito. I'm actually going to kick things off with just kind of an overall introduction of Amazon Identity, also do some fun things. But before we get going, let's maybe have some quick intros from the audience, get you guys talking a little bit and get into this. So with a raise of hands, what best describes your role? Are you a DevOps Cloud Administrator? Hands up. No one in the crowd. Wow. How about a Solutions Architect? All right, a couple of those. Application Developer. Excellent. You'll love Cognito. And Product Leader, Strategy. Yeehaw. Okay. Okay, and of the audience, you all have any experience in AWS today? Are you already deployed in AWS? You're already like working with this stuff on a regular basis? Okay, some decent experience in the room. And are you looking to build more solutions on AWS? Absolutely. Good stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this thing moving. The areas we want to focus in on, as I was mentioning, it really, we have two core identity suites that are built upon the AWS Identity and Access Management, AWS IAM. We're going to learn some things about federating, managing application clients with custom claims, some of the best ways to manage least privilege, operating at scale, and best practices. So let's dive in. Okay, and so for this actual intro section, and this is just kind of the section that I'm going to be doing as a part of this, I'm going to give you kind of an overall of an intro into AWS Cloud and Identity Management, bit of the background, bit of the key terminology and concepts. Some of the terms, unless you've been really indoctrinated into the AWS culture, they may be different than what you're expecting. So I just want to make sure that when the other folks are up here talking, you're not getting the wrong idea about different things, and we're level setting. Okay, so starting off with something fun, the importance of identity. You know, identity is power. It is an incredibly powerful thing, and we see it. Well, I've been in identity and access management all my life. I should say all my professional life, 25 years. And as I'm watching movies and things, I'm always seeing like, wow, identity, it doesn't just play a crucial part in our professional lives, but also like in these movies and these different plots and stories. You see like in supernatural things with demons and fairies and ghosts, you need to know their identity. That's like how you can have power over them, is to just know them. Likewise, Harry Potter. Well, who's the bad guy in Harry Potter? He who must not be named. Very good. Because what's scarier than something that you really can't even identify, right? It's like this amorphous threat. And even when they do name him, Voldemort, which actually does have its own meaning. In French, it's thief of death. That's not his name either. His real name is Tom Riddle. And it's not until actually it becomes really a pivot point of the entire plot of the series when they learn Voldemort's background and they can actually sort of research him and figure out how to defeat him. Same thing in Star Wars. You look at the original trilogy, Empire Strikes Back. What is the most famous line in Empire Strikes Back? Yes, it's an identity reel. Luke, I am your father. And it's also not just a throwaway, it is an absolute pivotal point of the entire series. It's where we get the plot resolution. And it's not just even some of these current things. We can go all the way back to ancient Greece with Homer's Odyssey, where identity plays just a really key, critical part of the entire storyline. There's this one story. One of the books within Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus and his men get captured by a Cyclops. Cyclops is named Polyphemus. And as Polyphemus is putting them in the cave, getting them all trapped, he asks Odysseus, "So what's your name?" And Odysseus responds, "My name is nobody." And you're kind of wondering, why is he hiding his identity with this? But it actually comes into a really core, critical plot moment where later on, Odysseus plunges a spear into the Cyclops, blinding him. Cyclops makes all sorts of crazy screaming and shrieking, and his neighbors hear and come over to the cave. And it's like, hey, Polyphemus, what's going on? What's wrong? Who's hurting you? To which Polyphemus replies, nobody. Nobody's hurting me. And once again, it's a whole play, it's a little trick, but then it even continues beyond that. Because once you go beyond, once they went beyond that part, Odysseus and his men escape out to the sea, and then they steal all Polyphemus' sheep, and it's a whole big thing. And Polyphemus, blind and can't find his flock, and he screams out, who did this? Who are you? And of course, Odysseus, being a hero, being someone who he wants to take credit for what he's done. So he goes off and he stands on top of the ship and says, I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, raider of cities, whose home is in Ithaca. So he identifies himself. But what he didn't plan on was that Polyphemus' father is Poseidon. And so Polyphemus calls out to his father and says, can you avenge me? And so Poseidon, he's not allowed to kill Odysseus because the fates say that he will make it home, but they don't say when. And so Poseidon then tortures Odysseus the next 10 years, killing his men, killing everyone who helps him. And he ends up coming back to Ithaca all by himself. And so here you see identity. It's a key part of all this culture. There is power in identity. And how does this come into play today? Well, in traditional IT architectures, probably stuff a lot of us has grown up with, the security perimeter, or I should say perimeter was the security model, where we were entirely dependent upon this. And so, a typical model, when you go to log in, you log in to a web access manager and you get an encrypted cookie. And that encrypted cookie gives you some protection as you're sending it back and forth over the internet. But once it goes past your sort of DMZ, or demilitarized zone, what happens? Your web access manager is going to decrypt that cookie and write in clear text with the request. Oh, this user is Kevin Shanley. And what protects that request? The whole perimeter. If an attacker gets inside that perimeter, they can forge their own requests, they can do whatever they want. There is no security beyond that. And so how long does it take to make a firewall request in this model? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month? It was kind of insane going through all this. And so, it has a number of issues associated with it. We have to have this implied trust between zones, because if we don't, you now have to encrypt everything. You now need to have these tokens that go all over the place, which is a much more secure model, but it generally wasn't done. And there are also other issues with this. When we're making calls, so I make a call as Kevin Shanley to the application server, but then when it goes from the application server to, say, a microservice, from the microservice to a database, what are we using? We're using internal service accounts, non-human accounts to make a database call. And so the provenance of the original identity is now all abstracted. And what that means is that when I make a call to the database as Kevin Shanley, it's going in as a database administrator. And this is a source of things like a SQL injection attack, because the database has no idea that I'm making the call. It just sees a database administrator. So when we went to the cloud, we had to do things a little bit differently. Within the cloud, there are no perimeters. We have all these shared services. And really the first problem we're trying to fix within the cloud, it wasn't security. It was the resource model. And that was the fact that, in that model on the left, well, users are trying to, organizations are having tens, hundreds, thousands of servers, and they're running at 5% utilization for like 95% of the time. And then when there's a big run on a Black Friday or tax day or some major seasonal event, yeah, then they're hitting 100% utilization. But then for the rest of the year, they're just carrying all this capacity. Well, when we move over to a shared service model, we fix that problem. We can now get away from that model of running things at 5%. We can run things at closer to 100%. So we're getting many, many multiples of efficiency, but the whole perimeter evaporates. And what that means is you need a pervasive application security model. Every service needs authentication and authorization. And all these services have charges. If you just started getting charged for CPU cycles on Lambdas because we were letting things go through, if folks are allowed to make SMS calls, store files on your S3 buckets and fill things up, you'd be furious because your bill would go nuts. And so we had to create this model of really security everywhere and authentication to all these things. And so in this, I'd like to talk through, here are all the different services within AWS Identity and Access Management. And from this, the core service, AWS IAM, this is a service, if you've ever used AWS, this is a service you've used. It underpins absolutely everything on every service. It is on the control plane, the data plane. Anything you're trying to access, you need permissions to. You're using some form of IAM for that. But then there are higher level services on top of that. So AWS IAM Identity Center, that's our workforce identity and access management solution. This would be kind of the equivalent of an Okta type of solution. AWS Directory Service, that gives you Microsoft Active Directory in the cloud, right in your AWS environment. Amazon Cognito, that's our consumer IAM environment. And so this would be kind of the Auth0 side of things. Likewise, a lot of our problems in Amazon are problems of size and scale. It's not that hard to create an account. It's not that hard to provision an EC2 instance. But once you have to provision 1,000 and manage them across all sorts of accounts, managing that complexity is a whole different problem, and it's a much more complex problem. And that's where we have Organizations and Resource Access Manager. But for a minute or two, let's just go ahead and talk a little bit more about AWS IAM. With this, I want to talk through a little bit of the terminology, make sure everyone is level setting on the same basic points. This was one of the first things for me. What's an AWS account? Well, coming from generic IAM background, I look at an IAM account and think, oh, it's a user account, right? No, not at all. It is a resource container. It's a container for cost tracking and billing. This is sort of the base, our base container of understanding, really, where do we send the bills? And so because of that, it also has security around it. A whole security perimeter and boundary around all these things, because you can't have something build without having a perimeter around it of some sort. And so when we're talking about AWS accounts, everyone starts off with one account, but over time, your organization will have more and more and more accounts. And some of our orgs have thousands of these things, because you don't just have accounts for different lines of business, but all your subunits, your business, your marketing, sales, development teams. Then you federate further down from that, and then these organizations have really deep hierarchies. So takeaway from this, AWS accounts are top-level accounts, billing accounts, when we talk about that. It's not a user account. And when we talk about users, well, that is what you thought they are. It's actually just straightforward, specific individuals. It's generally a person. It could also be a service account or non-human account, but generally not. We actually have a different way of handling these types of accounts. So when you are doing service account type behavior, we're actually using roles. And I'll talk about that much more in just a second. Couple different parameters around service accounts. We have these nice Amazon resource names, unique identifiers, secret keys, but it's basically a user as you come to use them. Likewise, kind of similar for groups. It's just a collection of users. Within some organizations, they mix up groups and roles. For us, it's all groups, and you collect these logical areas, whether it's going to be a group of developers, sales, testers, whatever. Users inherit access, but one of the important things, groups cannot be nested. So if you've been living your life in the Active Directory world, where most organizations have nested their groups to oblivion, and you can't tell who's got access to what anymore, that's not allowed, specifically within the environment. Resources, not specifically an IAM construct, but IAM is used to protect it. And just a handy little thing, a footnote of resource terminology. So the standard resource icon is that cube up there. But actually, every group, whether it be like S3 or DynamoDB, they all have specific resource icons. So if you are making architecture diagrams, if you're doing these things, we actually have standard sets of icons to be able to go and represent all these things so that your diagrams can be much more meaningful. Okay, roles. So this is probably the most confusing concept to most folks coming in. When I came in as well, I looked at roles and, hey, I've grown up with roles all my life. You get a role to do database access, and that's what it is. A role within the Amazon world, it's much more, it's really a person. And it's a persona. It's a persona that you can take over temporarily. And temporarily is that keyword. And we kind of have this paradigm in our normal lives anyway. So when I'm at home, I'm like the root user. I can destroy things, I can create things, I can do whatever I want. But if I go to the grocery store, well, I'm not a root user anymore, right? I have a consumer role, a consumer persona. And with that, I can basically have read-only access to all the shelves. I can go and have transaction authority at the cash register, so I can make transactions. And then when I leave, that temporary role evaporates. But I might come back to that same grocery store, and maybe I'm also an employee. And so I can actually pick up a different role. I can wear a different hat for this. And when I come in, now I have a different role. Now I can pick up a scanner. Now I can change the prices, right? So the way we look at roles are these temporary personas with temporary credentials. And essentially, you'll go through, and when you need to go and access an S3 bucket, a database, whatever, you're not just assigned that role and you have it. You log in with your persona, and then you're going to call the STS service, or a service that calls the STS under the covers, and call assume role. And that's where your role will actually change from like that home user to that grocery store user, or grocery store employee, or S3 write access. And finally, policies. We could spend 3 days just on policies. It is a deep, deep subject. Internally, we get a lot of training on it. But when we boil it all down, there are 6 types. They're either allow or deny. Deny takes precedence. And it's basically managing all your access, assigning a policy to a user, a group, a role, or assigning it to the resource side. Okay, so let's go over some of those different identity services. And we'll start off with AWS IAM Identity Center. So as mentioned, this is our workforce identity and access management solution. Super powerful, and well, one of the greatest things about it is that it's free, which is amazing. It's free, it does SAML coming in, passwordless, you can hook it up to an Active Directory. When you log in, you get that sort of application grid with all the apps you have access to. So fantastic. And one of the really great things about this as well is that when you're coming in, well, we mentioned before about Amazon accounts. You might have account A and account B, and they have access. They'll have different resources. You'll have EC2 instances, S3 buckets here, and you'll have S3 buckets over here. And maybe this is sales and that's marketing. And they want to be able to access files in each other's sides, right? Well, there are permissions, boundaries around these things. So how do you get access to the resources? What you're able to do with Identity Center is easily set up sharing so that you can actually just go through and set up access, and these guys can go right through. So it's a really powerful mechanism for creating single sign-on within your AWS environment. Okay. Moving on to directory services, one of the big workforce problems is that a lot of organizations, they have their users sitting in Active Directory. Not a problem when everything's on-prem, but once you start moving out to the cloud, well, you want to be able to access those directory users. You want to be able to authenticate users. You want to be able to update passwords and do different things while you're in the cloud. Well, the Managed Active Directory service does exactly that for you. It has a connector, goes back into your organization, can set up trusts, can replicate accounts, so you can do all things locally. And with that, you can also integrate all your AWS, or sorry, your Active Directory aware applications. So things like IAM Identity Center, EC2 instances, you can now do right into Active Directory in the AWS cloud. So with Cognito, Cognito is our AWS Consumer Identity Access Management application, or as I like to say, awesome SIAM. It's sign up, sign in, and access control for your customers. What this gives you, it is a frictionless self-registration and customizable user repository. So you can actually customize how that your user repository is set up, what attributes you're going to keep, if you want to put additional controls around that. As you come in, you can actually customize all parts of it. So when you come up to the sign-up portion of Cognito, you can do progressive profiling. You can do identity proofing. You can add all sorts of additional bits to it, like National Health Service in the UK. When users log into that, you can actually sign up there. I should say, when they sign up for the very first time, it'll just ask for a couple bits of information. Hey, give me an email address and a password. Well, that gives you some level of access for like COVID tracking. But if I want to access my medical records, well, now I need to do things like likeness and liveness checking, right? It's going to check to see if I'm actually there and match my picture against driver's license registries and such. And so it gives you really a whole framework for building up your own applications. It's super developer friendly. Likewise, we can do passwordless, adaptive auth. We have a whole compromised password database pulled in from the dark web so that when users try to authenticate with a compromised password, we force them to change it. Gives you single sign-on using standard federation protocols, SAML, OpenID Connect, OAuth, so you can go out right to our endpoints. And in fact, I grew up in the time where you always had to deploy web server agents on all these different web servers to try and do that stuff. We do it right in the infrastructure. So when you deploy an application load balancer or an API gateway, we can actually pull in those OAuth tokens and read them directly and give you access right into that part of your service. Likewise, we have a Cognito credential broker. And this allows you to do some of that role changing, where if I want to go and access the files in an S3 bucket, I can call the credential broker with my Kevin Shanley account, and then it'll give me AWS temporary credentials to go and access that S3 bucket. So it kind of opens the door into the entire AWS ecosystem. Was there a question there? I saw a hand come up and down. No? Okay. Okay. AWS Organizations. What this gets you is, well, I was saying a lot of the problems we have are problems of size and scale. And AWS Organizations gives you this capability to do a whole hierarchy of your org. Before you'd have like 10, 100, 1,000 AWS accounts without necessarily a lot of formatting to it. With AWS Organizations, you can put this thing into a whole like LDAP tree hierarchy. You can assign policies to different parts of that tree. You can assign billing, share resources, set up all those agreements. It gives you an organizational structure with which to really set up complex attributes, complex sharing agreements and such. And likewise, Resource Access Manager, once again, all about scale. Setting up an EC2 instance, not that hard. Creating an AWS account, creating some objects, S3 buckets, it's all not that hard. But once we start doing it 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times, now we have massive issues. And so as your organization moves from those sort of simple scale to hard scale problems, these are the tools you're going to need in your toolbox to be able to do this. And so then you can securely share your resources. And so I'd given that example of you have sales and marketing, and we each have files in our S3 buckets. And of course, they want to be able to access each other's files, right? They do a lot of the same types of things. Well, how do you solve that problem? You now have permissions boundaries. Well, some folks will actually copy files from one bucket to another so that it's within their org. They start duplicating resources. They start creating a big management problem. This is to get you around that. This is to set up these cross-sharing agreements so that you can effectively use all the resources out there, only have them once, and make your operations a lot more efficient. Okay. So moving forward, and I think I'm right on time. Up next is going to be Jonathan. He's going to talk through IAM Identity Center, our workforce identity product. I also have a whole bunch of T-shirts, these fancy AWS shirts. After Jonathan's presentation, he's demoing them, we'll do a break, and you can come and get a T-shirt, go get some coffee, snacks, whatever's out there. And yeah, I think that's it. Great.
Thank you, Kevin. Can we switch over to... So we're going to transition over to my deck here real quick. Alrighty, so let's start off. My name is Jonathan Van Kim. I'm a senior solutions architect here at AWS. I've been with AWS now coming up on 8 years now. I've been in the SA role now for about 4 years, and my job here is a specialist. I specialize in security and identity. In the last 4 years, I've been working with enterprise customers to help them through their journey, especially from identity. And I'm actually a security generalist as well, so virtually anything in security I'll help out with, but identity is where I do spend most of my time working with customers on. So, as Kevin mentioned earlier, we're going to go down, we're going to jump into, now we're going to look at specifically workforce identities. And I want to kind of level set a little bit on workforce identities. First of all, workforce identities, this entire deck is going to be a bit AWS centric. So we're going to look at workforce identities. As you go through here, you're going to see a lot of hints on how we do it in AWS. So what is a workforce identity? Kevin's already mentioned a little bit about a user, but in this case, we're really looking at humans are part of the organization. So this is someone who's living and breathing, hopefully. This is also something that's unique to each person. And this is something that they use, like a badge that we all have here. I'm not wearing mine, but all of us have a badge, and we can use this to get access to things. In this case, maybe we can get access to payroll to see if you got paid. And the identity itself may have attributes. So if you look at the little badge right here, I actually scanned it a little early, just as I was curious what the QR code would turn out. And it was just it's a little code on there. But it has attributes in there. The attributes probably stored in some database, but it has attributes about you. And that attribute can be used for some sort of access later or for some sort of authorization. So let's kind of go over a really, really high level, just kind of, and there's a reason why I'm going with this extremely high level workflow here. In this case, we're looking at a workflow where an employee who wants to get access to something in AWS, and they're going to look at, I need to log in. I'm going to log in through my user directory, my IDP, and they're going to get authenticated. The authentication will happen, and it will get passed along into some sort of IAM solution. In this case, we're going to use AWS IAM. AWS IAM says, OK, you're good to go. And the employee now has a principal. And the principal is either an IAM user or an IAM role. The employee now takes that principal and says, I want to access some data. In this case, there's some data inside an S3 bucket. And the service, Amazon S3, says, OK, this person with a role or an IAM user or role has asked me for some piece of data. I'm going to go talk to the IAM system, AWS IAM, and say, is this person authorized to use this? So now we have two pieces in here that I wanted to pull out. So we have authentication and authorization. Authentication. Who are you? Please identify yourself. And then tell me your secret. Now, this secret is obviously some sort of secret that's unique to that identity that pairs up in some way, shape, or form to allow me to say, yes, you are indeed that person. And in AWS, the principal in this case is an IAM user or an IAM role. We're going to keep talking about that a lot, and eventually you'll see why I keep hammering on and bringing up IAM users, IAM roles a lot in AWS. So if you're using an IAM user, or if you're using an IAM user, you have a login. This is pretty standard. I think this has been around for eons now. Since I've been on the internet, actually. Some sort of username, some sort of password. I'm using login at aws.com, and the password is awesome. But IAM users and has another way of getting access to AWS. and that is the ability to use an access key or a secret access key. And the reason why we have this extra mechanism for you to get into AWS and access stuff is more than just being able to log into the console and go to EC2, go to S3, go to RDS, any of those other services that you want to take a look at. You can use an access key to access AWS programmatically. So if I want to go through the command line and access AWS, this is an example key. I promise you it doesn't work, but you're welcome to take a picture and give it a shot. But this is an example of what those keys look like. And you would be able to take those keys and utilize those for access to AWS. Now, this is kind of like pretty much fair game, normal, nothing very advanced. But we're going to need to jump into something that will increase our authentication. We're going to need to step up our game a bit, because as you know, and in the world that we live in here, identities are not necessarily, as I just took off my badge and left it over there, someone in this room could take that badge and walk around and pretend to be me. And this could happen as well inside a workforce environment or anywhere in the world. So AWS supports advanced authentication. We have email-based verification that's been around for a while. Someone, you log in and says, check your email. You got a 6-digit code. Go type it in. We know who you are, because you've also. And the reason why we do it that way is because you've also we assume you've authenticated through your email, and you are exclusively getting access to that email. The other ways, which is virtual MFA, virtual multi-factor authentication, and hardware multi-factor authentication. So as of today, in the industry I've been in for quite a while now, MFA, whether it's of any kind actually, has been kind of ubiquitous now. It's basically table stakes, and 99% of the systems now support it. Now, when hardware MFA first came out, I actually remember I used that little RSA token that had like the 6-digit code. It was on my keychain. I carried it around, and if I forgot it at home, I was not logging into work. I had to go home, literally go get it, and bring it with me. So part of the reason why I bring this up is because as we increase the step up of our authentication, we are also adding complexity for the user experience. So hardware MFA worked really, really well, but it was an inconvenience. If I forgot it, if I lived in a really big city, I could be looking at a multi-hour turnaround just to get access to work. Back in the day when I've been a system administrator for when I first started and MFA was around, that was one of the things I heard a lot. Like I liked just typing in my username and password, and I got in just fine. I don't have to remember this key. Did I lose it? Did I put it in my briefcase? Did I leave it on the airplane? The user experience, while it was great from a security standpoint, the user experience created difficulties for them. So this is something that, as a theme going along, MFA is something that's really important because it's great for security, but we also want to make MFA better and easier for the use. And this is why I like AWS, at least in AWS Identity Center, supports FIDO 2. In FIDO authenticators, such as YubiKeys, I have one attached to my laptop. You just plug it in, and all you have to do is touch it. What's nice about that is I'm not going to leave the YubiKey in my hotel room, or I'm not going to leave it at home. It's attached to my laptop, and I don't have to remember anything except for a PIN. I just touch it, and it works. So we're actually making our user experience better and better. As it gets, the problem, there's a little bit of a disadvantage of that, is I have to get a YubiKey. Now we get into platform authenticators, and I love platform authenticators because I'm a Mac user. I have a MacBook, and I have an iPhone. And being able to use the platform authentication, as long as they're compliant, works really well. So all I have to do is touch my fingerprint on the MacBook, and I'm logged in as well. So this is now we're getting better and better about our user experience, and this is not only more secure, but also making the users' lives much better. So this is a really, really important thing to think about as we progress through this deck. I hope this showed up, and it shows up fine on my screen, and it's a little blurry on that, so I apologize. This is just a screenshot of Identity Center. And as you can see, we have support. I wanted to show you that the support that we have for authenticator apps, security keys, and built-in authenticators. So this is natively supported in Identity Center. I'm going to talk briefly about authorization. Authorization, as Kevin has already mentioned, we go into IAM policies. We could be here all day. Maybe we can make a whole conference out of that. But authorization is, after you've been authenticated, the workforce, I see who you are. Now, what can you do? As part of the authentication, I've given you an IAM user or an IAM role. And those particular principles gives me the ability to attach permissions to it. If I don't attach any permissions to it, I can still authenticate to AWS. When I log into the console, the console actually just says access denied all over. Like all the little widgets and applets will just say access denied everywhere. So it is possible to give you a role with no permissions attached. So without any permissions attached to that role, we give you an implicit deny. So unless you explicitly state that you are giving this role or user something to do, by default, you log into AWS, you have nothing to do except to look at some red flags. So let's say you do want to give this role or IAM user something to do. So here's some examples. There's a really basic one. I just want to start an EC2 instance. I want to start up a machine and whatever it is, Linux, Windows, it just starts up. Maybe I want to change the network settings. As we go higher up in the application stack, maybe someone wants to start up some machine learning algorithms. And then maybe they need access to some data warehouses. Now, I gave you a full range there as an example because you're able to give those users fine-grained access. The IAM policy that we're going to just kind of like go over very briefly has the ability to give you very, very, very fine-grained control of what you want to give to the user. I can give, I'll give you an example. I can give a user access to a data warehouse and split that, and be a specific time of the day. They have to have certain attributes, whether they're on a specific role, specific team, what part of the country they're in. It can be narrowed down very, very. Sorry, not part. What location they're at. It can be narrowed down very specific to do this. Now, doing so, you get a very long policy, and it can be very complex. But the capabilities of doing fine-grained access controls is available there. So the question you should have here is, how should your organization set up access to allow your workforce to get into AWS resources? We already showed you an example where someone wanted to access an S3 bucket with a bunch of data into it. So I know earlier Kevin asked the group what was the personas in this room, and we're going to go through a persona exercise here in a little bit. And there's two services that you can use to get access to AWS for your workforce identities. So the first one, AWS IAM Identity and Access Manager, which is IAM. And then the second one is IAM Identity Center, which is the successor to SSO. So for those who are wondering why I have that up there, the service was rebranded back in July. So personas. What kind of employees need access to AWS? So they could be cloud admins, they could be security auditors, they could be developers, incident responders, or operators. Just in this list, you can have a much larger list, but just in this list alone, this could encompass to thousands of employees. Developers alone would probably make up the bulk of that audience. But we're going to pick one. So we're going to pick cloud admin. Meet Susan. Susan's been given the task given the task by her manager. It's like, I need you to set up workforce identity into AWS. And here are some of the requirements. This is a really short list of requirements. I've just picked a handful of those for the purposes of illustration. But when you do the real exercise of deciding what type of workforce identity, workforce method that you're going to use, this list could probably be a lot longer. In order for you to scale into AWS and grow your business there, number one is enable a large number of workforce users to access AWS. Well, once you have all that, how do you scale management for that? And how do you give access with the least amount of effort? Also, how do you ensure employees access is removed when employees leave? And then meet compliance. And then reduce the overhead of managing credentials. Now, this is in reference to this is the management of credentials for the user. What is their user experience when they have to manage credentials? There are 3 models for accessing AWS. IAM Users. We're going to go through this whole list. IAM Users is a local user per AWS account. Think of it as like a local user for a Windows machine, a local user for a Linux machine. This is a local user for an AWS account. We don't recommend using this. The use case to really use IAM users is if this is your first time going in there and you're setting things up. So you have to have a starting identity of some sort. A starting principle of some sort inside AWS in order for you to access the system. The second way, which is probably has been around for quite a long time now, is AWS IAM Federation. And this is the ability for you to take an IDP and federate it with each individual AWS account. So you have your IDPs, such as like ADFS, SAML 2.0, and you will connect each individual account, and you'll have individual federations for that. And then the last one is AWS IAM Identity Center. This is the ability for you to federate just once, and then it becomes a hub. And it allows you to manage all your federations in one place. And we're going to go into a lot more details on that. So let's kind of step through here. I'm going to go through each of those three models. So Susan's requirements are enable many workforce users to access AWS. So if you look at this diagram right here, you can see the employees here are on the left. And let's say one employee says, I need access to account A, B, J, and Q. Well, she has to log into each of those accounts and create an IAM user and provide the credentials to that employee. That employee now has approximately 5 credentials that they have to manage. So how is she going to scale access? Again, she has to go back in. I need to change a policy. Let's say they change job functions. She would have to log into each of those accounts and change the policies associated with the IAM user for that employee. Give access with the least amount of effort. So far, if you guys have been following along here, the theme here is she has to log into each individual account and modify those IAM users and the policies in order to change permissions. Now, this one is a really big one. Because these IAM users are independent on every single account, Susan may not even get to. Susan has the job of removing access when an employee leaves. Now, you have a bigger problem is what if no one told Susan that the employee left and they still have access to these accounts? So this is not a this is one that's definitely going to be part of compliance, which is the next question right there, and is something that is why we highly discourage the use of IAM users because it's not a centralized directory where it's easy for you to remove access should that time arise. Reduce the overhead of managing credentials. This is definitely not reducing any management of credentials because the user, or the employee in this case, has to memorize at least 5 sets of credentials, and he or she may decide to rotate those credentials on a different scale. So they would have to put all those passwords in some text file or LastPass and go through and remember what are my passwords. So it's not an ideal situation for the user, and is a really bad user experience. You see, it's a big red. Not recommended to do this. Please don't do this. We really there's definitely better ways to do this. Now continue on. Now we go into a federation model. We have the employees. And you have some sort of directory where all which is the source of truth for your users. We have hopefully one directory. All their credentials are in this directory. And this is what we're going to do here. We're going to enable federation. So with a directory and an IDP, we can enable AWS IAM Federation. In this case, we're going to enable many workforce users to access AWS, and the answer is yes. Without having to create any type of IAM local users, we're relying on a directory already that is existing in an organization to provide those identities to AWS. Once they're inside AWS, we now assume a role. And as we talked about earlier, an IAM role is a persona, a temporary persona. And you can assume an employee can log in at AWS, and they can have choices of personas. Today, I might be a cloud admin. Tomorrow, I may be just a security auditor. It can change, and they can have multiple roles. But at any given moment, they're just one. They can only have one personality, one identity, not multiple identities, all at once. Does this scale access? How does this scale access management? It does actually get better. She still has to log into each account. The permissions, the policies, are attached to each role, and she has to go in there and modify those permissions for each of those roles. But because there's less roles to the number of people, her workload is now significantly different. So she just has to manage the permissions that are associated with those roles as time goes on, and not necessarily associated with people coming and going or changing jobs. They would just have to change. They would change their ability to assume specific roles. Give access with the least amount of effort. This is for sure true, because all she has to do is just do the federation, and those credentials will have and set up the appropriate IAM policies, and those users would have access to those specific roles. Ensure access is removed. For sure, this checkbox is checked. And the reason why is because if an employee leaves, using an existing directory, typically HR will send out notifications and say, this user has left the company, please remove access, and you're reusing the exact same processes that you have already. So nothing new is being invented. No one has to be notified outside of what the normal process is to say some employee has left and please remove access to the system. So by removing access to the directory, or disabling the identity inside the directory, they automatically lose access to everything inside AWS all at once. Meet compliance requirements. If you're using your own directory, meeting compliance requirements is a lot easier because you've already done those compliance requirements as part of that directory. So such as the one above, employee ensure access is removed, this is a really easy thing to do. Reduce the overhead of managing credentials. Now this is still a little bit, this is still better than the others, than the previous solution where you have individual IAM users. In this case, you have credentials in the IAM roles. And I mentioned earlier, you remember that long access key, the access key and secret key that we saw as part of IAM users? IAM roles actually have them too, and they're temporary, they're ephemeral. And in order for the user to get that, there's a little bit of, it's not a very straightforward process as they log in, assume the role, and there's usually a way to, there's third-party ways to just to grab those credentials out and present it to the users. I'm going to show you how native way to do it, which is a lot easier here. This is recommended. It's better. Now we're going to get to the last one. So employees, the only thing that's changed here is that we have Identity Center in the middle. Employees still need to log in through directory. That directory is federating with Identity Center. We're going to use SAML 2.0 in this case. And the nice thing about this is all of those federation connections that we had in the previous one is now completely automatic in Identity Center. As you create new accounts, Identity Center will automatically federate to them. So this is something that Susan no longer has to do. The only federation connection she has to worry about is the one for between her IDP and Identity Center. So when a user logs in, they actually log in starting with Identity Center as a service SP-initiated login flow. And they get authenticated with their directory and IDP. And they will, again, get presented with IAM roles. And they get to choose whatever IAM roles that they want. So going through her requirements again, enable many workforce users. We've checked that already. Scale access management. Now this is something that is definitely better in Identity Center because instead of her having to log into account A, account B, C, and so forth, and modify permissions for IAM roles, those permissions are now created in Identity Center. So when she goes into Identity Center and she wants to create access for a role, persona for somebody, she would create a permission set and associate it with the user and associate it with an account, and Identity Center would automatically provision those roles for them. So now, instead of having so now everything's in one place. She doesn't have to find creative ways to do scripting to log in to every account, and she doesn't have to do CloudFormation stack sets and manage huge stack sets between all these accounts. It's now part of Identity Center, and she can do this centrally. So scale of access management is much easier for her now. Give access to the least amount of effort, still the same, because now the directory is still just federating with Identity Center. In fact, it's easier now because the the federations that are connecting Identity Center and the IAM role, the AWS accounts are completely managed by Identity Center. Ensure access is removed, meeting compliance requirements, and reduce the overhead of managing credentials. So this one is native now inside AWS Identity Center. So when a user logs in to Identity Center, they are presented with programmatic keys every single time. You log in through the console, you have a link that will present to you whether you want to log into the management console or you want to log in through APIs, and it gives you all the access keys and secret keys for you to use. So this is the recommended, this is the best solution for you to go forward with, for Susan at least. So here, Susan has chosen Identity Center. And the reason why she's chosen it because she's able to use the source of truth is from her existing directory. It's very, very simple. Simplified connectivity to AWS with just one federation. Admittedly, the diagram had a lot of lines going on here, but in reality, from her perspective in managing and building this environment, the implementation has been greatly simplified. Access is maintained from identity. Access is centrally managed with Identity Center. You still have the option to go through each account and manage those, still create roles and put policies on. But from a scalability standpoint, Identity Center now has that ability that she can just centrally go to it. She can maintain in compliance because she's using an existing directory, ability to remove access from one location, and you utilize workforce identities are provided temporary credentials for programmatic access. This is giving the user experience the ability to do something that previously they had to load third-party tools in order to provide the functionality. So we're going to kind of dive further into Identity Center. So here is a diagram. Here we see on the left, what is your identity source? So Identity Center itself actually has a directory, so you can utilize that as well. And we support all these other third-party partners as well. So you can see that we support AWS Managed Active Directory. We also support standalone Active Directory. We support Okta, Azure AD, OneLogin, Jump Cloud, Ping Identity. We also support other ones as well. That's not listed in here. So the other ones that we've tested with SAML 2.0 will work. And then we also support SCIM. So this is something that is in addition to Identity Center. And that is the ability to take your user identities from your directories and synchronize them into Identity Center. Remember, I just said Identity Center has its own directory. So now you can sync over a set of users that you want synced over. You don't have to sync them all, but you can sync over a subset of that. And once those identities are in there, you now have one place for you to manage those identities. So you can assign them permissions to one or more accounts. You can assign them permissions to applications as well. So this is something that's also a benefit of Identity Center, which is the ability for you to single sign-on into things like Box, Office 365, Salesforce. There's hundreds of pre-configured accounts, applications that we've already built into Identity Center, and you can do it with any SAML 2.0 compatible application. So here's an actual log. This is the actual login screen. It has my name on the top. Where on the first box is all your AWS accounts. Then you have Box and so forth, and all the other applications. One of the reasons why we highly recommend AWS IAM Identity Center is that it is the front door to, we want this to be the front door to AWS. It's been designed to work that way, to scale for a growing number of workforce identities. You can manage fine-grained authorization at a central location and at scale. And it's able to connect to various applications, such as Salesforce or Box. The other thing, which I just kind of put an example here, seamless EC2 integration. We're building integrations from Identity Center into various parts of AWS, and this is one of them. And one of these is the ability to log into an EC2 from Identity Center, and it'll just, let's say it's a Windows machine, you would log in and you would RDP right in. It looks like, I used to be a Windows administrator, it looks almost like, hey, I just logged in from a domain joined EC2. It's not, or it can be, but it's not. So from Identity Center perspective, we'll manage the local credentials on that Windows machine and give the user a really cool experience so that they can manage EC2 better. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about Identity Center or consider using it, because these integrations will continue to grow. Another cool feature that is part of Identity Center that is not part of any that we recently built earlier this year, actually, is the ability to do delegated administration. So what is delegated administration for Identity Center? That's the ability for Susan to say, my current Identity Center is running inside the management account, which is the top account inside an organization. But I have business units, or I have other teams who want to have access to Identity Center and want to manage their own set of users. So you have the ability to take Identity Center and delegate it to another account and provide a subset of administration controls to that delegated admin. And then those who log in, you can scope those down so that they can only manage the users they want. So this gives you the ability to, one, move the administration away from the root account, and two, allows you to do separation of duties better without having to give access to the management account. So we've already talked about the first three right here, and the one thing that I really want to kind of jump into is the integration with CLI v2. And with this case, AWS CLI is our way, something you install on your laptop or desktop, and it gives you the ability to run API calls to AWS APIs and gather to use those temporary keys that I mentioned earlier. This is exclusive to Identity Center because it gives you those access keys and secret keys natively, and you get it as part of either logging in through the console, or you can actually type in AWS SSO login, and there's a bunch of parameters you have to put in there, but you can also log in that way, and then you'll be presented with access keys and secret keys. So here's kind of this is a high-level workflow. So we have workforce users on the left. They have a web browser, and they have the command line interface already installed on a laptop. So you have to have a web browser, and you have to have the command line installed. You have that. You log into your identity provider, and you do a device authorization flow into AWS IAM Identity Center. And if you guys, just yesterday, I bought a new, last week, I bought a new Fire Stick. And I reinstalled Netflix on there, and I had to do a very similar, well, it's actually the same device authorization flow. This is what we're using. So when you log in and you do this, you'll be presented with those funny, please type in the 6 characters that you see on the screen into your web browser, and we're doing a device authorization. You get redirected to your web browser if the web browser is available, and you get authenticated, and you're provided with temporary access keys and secret keys. And you can use that now to access your AWS accounts. Here are some final thoughts for from a workforce standpoint, when you walk away, if you don't remember all the other stuff I talked about, I'd like you to walk away thinking about these things. Use a centralized authority on your workforce identity. Definitely consider your user experience. So work backwards from the user. What is the better the user experience, the more likely they will adopt your security controls, and they'll have a better time using your platform. Reduce management. Keep it simple. So when you're considering which type of identity, which type of federation you're going to use, or connecting your workforce identity to AWS, what is the one that gives you the least amount of management and keeps it a lot simpler so it's easier to manage in the long run? Now, I mentioned earlier in the earlier slides, like MFA has been around for a while now. MFA is, as far as I'm concerned at least, MFA is table stakes. Everybody should be using MFA. And use MFA, such as the one for FIDO. This last statement here is least privilege is a journey. And the reason why I brought that up is because when you're doing the other 4 or more requirements, it's a journey towards least privilege. Least privilege is not a destination. It's something that's very difficult to get to, but it's all about journeying your way through. What is your appetite for the amount of management? The more secure, the more least privilege you get, the higher the security management gets. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's something that you want to journey through and take away these 5 elements. if you want to get started, here's, I'm going to leave this up for like a couple seconds. Started with AWS Identity Center or AWS IAM Federation. So we're about to, oh, actually, that was actually my last slide. Any questions from the room? We got a mic here, if you want your voice. Okay.